welcome to the Deal Finder Corner. So this is your weekly property talk show brought to you by Property Filter, hosted by myself, Guillaume Black, your not so favorite Frenchman today because a bit late, and the CEO and co-founder at Property Filter, the UK's highest rated platform to find deals. And as you know, we're on a mission to empower our property investor and deal sourcer members to find 1,000 deals this year, thanks to the Property Blueprint, the Property Filter Blueprint. And the purpose really of this Deal Finder Corner is to give you more and the best of the available resources, invite expert guests like we have Tony today, who will share with you the latest and most current strategies, tactics, and secrets about what actually works right now in terms of finding and making deals and the reality of systemizing and running a high-performance business in property. So it really is my pleasure to introduce to you today Mr. Tony Fairs, which I've had the pleasure to share stages and speak at different events in the past. So Tony is an entrepreneur from Fenham in Newcastle. He began his property career at the Northumbria University. He later managed local estate agency offices and a major auction house. Some 11 years ago, Tony founded Fairs, offering full estate agent services in his area. And by late 2018, he started property investing properly, and he acquired 34 properties valued just shy of £2 million using BRR. In 2020, Tony launched Fairs Investments, which was and is still a property sourcing and education company, which helped purchase just shy of £6 million worth of property. And he did bits of service accommodation as well, and all things, strategy investment related. So he also started Fairs Development and secured his first site recently with a GDV of £1 million, and actually got a successful podcast you probably want to look into, which is Property Talk on the Time. So I'm very much looking forward to hear more about Tony's talk today. So what you can expect from today's episode. So Tony will share with us a number of tricks of the trades, how you can make your investment even more profitable, secrets of estate agents and auctioneers, and how you can defraud the estate agents. And then hopefully, if I've not taken too much of the time already, we'll have some time for some Q&A. So please give a massive Property Filter virtual welcome to Mr. Tony Fairs. Thanks so much.
No problem. Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Guillaume. Appreciate that. So I suppose there's a number of sort of places to start, really. I mean, a lot of people come into this space having looked to, find their first investment property. And I tend to find that a lot of people, when they are doing their searches, it's kind of like they're looking as like a bit of a headless chicken. There's no real structure to that, to what it is they want to do, really. I mean, people go on to Rightmove, they search the area that they're already living. The search within 5 miles of there. There's no real filters used to qualify that data that you're looking at. Whereas I think Property Filter's been great for us in the sourcing business, in that it's really provided some structure to that element, because again, the sourcers working within my business, they were doing the same as everybody else. They were looking at the oldest listed properties. They were looking at everything that was new to the market. They were jumping from buy-to-lets to HMOs. So I think using Property Filter and having the number of different options within there, to set up the multiple different search criterias, I think from our side, it's made the process to find these deals so much easier. I mean, at the moment, I think using Property Filter, we're probably averaging anywhere between sort of 6 and 10 purchases a month. So that's on the straightforward purchase side, using that. That's buying properties for clients or for ourselves. But we've also doubled up using Property Filter with a direct-to-vendor sort of letter campaign. But that's coming at it more from an investment point. So we've managed to negotiate a couple of purchase lease options for our own portfolios by using it. And that's just using things like the, back and reduced section. We've had some really good conversations with clients who have short leases. We've had some great chats with people who've had sale fall throughs. So I think when you can combine all of the tools within Property Filter with the things that work, approaching landlords direct or owner of properties direct, then I think that's where it's probably been a sort of a great benefit from us. Again, it's led to us probably widening our net in terms of our geographical location, We tend to cover within 1 hour's drive of our office. That's probably going to go national now because we've got so much data at our fingertips. So yeah, I mean, since we came across, it's definitely the most comprehensive software that we've used. We've tried sort of, you know, other platforms in the past, and this one's really became part of our day-to-day tools, you know. So I think you should be sort of commended for that. But one of the things that I wanted to sort of touch on within this talk was...
Tony, thanks so much. Like, we didn't talk about anything, so I really appreciate this introduction. Thanks so much.
Oh, that's all right, no problem.
Appreciate it.
Was it okay to continue there?
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry, I
so
was
what
just
I was
saying
going to say was,
I'm grateful
I
for this
think
sharing it.
when you can combine things like property filter, like, I mean, if, for example, the property portals, most people on here, I would be correct in assuming most people would have probably started with Rightmove because it's the most popular of the property portals. In terms of it from an estate agency side of things, an account with Rightmove would probably cost us on average £2,500 to £3,000 per month to have sales and lettings listings. Zoopla's probably going to average, and again, this changes based on your location, but for us, it's around about £700 to £800 per month. And then on the market, probably costs around £200. But what people don't understand is Rightmove and Zoopla answer to shareholders, whereas on the market, it's being created for agents by agents. So you'll often find a lot of the deals that come on the market have a 24-hour exclusivity period before they get listed on the other portals. So just little tricks like that, you'll often see, if you looked at the last 24 hours listings on Rightmove within 10 miles of your location, you probably find that a number of those properties are already sold subject to contract online. Now, what that'll probably have been is that was a listing that probably went live yesterday on the market, but didn't go live till today on Rightmove. So things like time, as well as sort of your relationship with agents, can be the difference between you getting a deal and not. So that's why I love on the platform how you can start at the left-hand side and work your way along to the right, because it's right, you know, they are the more motivated sort of movers out there. But if you can combine using the platforms with building the right relationships with the agents, then that's going to be an absolute goldmine for you, whether that's securing deals for yourself or your investors, whether that's trying to find the most creative solutions that you can use the platform for. But one of the big things I would say is when you're using the platform, don't rule out the personal element when you're dealing with agents. I always liken it. I mean, I don't mean to be disrespectful to agents, but in a lot of times they are literally call center staff. They've never visited the properties that they're looking at on the screen in front of them. They don't know the landlords or the seller of that particular property, so they don't really know a lot of the background of that particular property or owner. So it's your job to fact find and to find out as much information as possible so that you can, you know, use the tools that are available to you, whether you buy it or whether you do a lease option. It's up to you to try to work that out from building that relationship with the agent. So when you're dealing with an agent, you're going to find there's a number of different people within the office. Most agents have a similar setup as well. You tend to have a valuer in the office, so that's the person that's going out doing the valuations. Now, they're the person who the owner of the property will probably respect their opinion more than anyone else's within the office, because most people, when they're selling a property, would have 3 different estate agent valuations. And they're going to pick the valuer who they probably got on best with or who give them the best advice. So when it then comes to a negotiator arranging viewings, giving feedback, they tend to want to speak to the valuer to see, you know, what their opinion is now they've had 10 viewings and 5 offers, which offer should they be going with, you know. So getting to know the valuers is a massive tip because they'll often understand the vendor's motivation. They'll understand where they're moving and why they're moving. But the important thing is they're actually going to know the financial side of this. They're often going to understand how much mortgage is remaining for the vendor and how much capital they actually require to buy their next property. I mean, we know people who are doing lease options on properties £1 million plus, and they're doing them with no money down. But they're doing it because they're finding, for example, a motivated seller. Often in these cases, it's a divorce. Mr. and Mrs. both need their own properties, and they don't want a nice £1 million house with the outgoings that comes with it. And if in a market like this where the interest rates are higher, and you know it's a higher priced property that's more difficult to sell. So if you can, you know, find a motivated seller, there is often opportunities for you to do a creative deal. You've just got to find the right properties, you know, use the right solutions when you're talking to them. And like you say, try to create a win-win from both sides. So like I say, getting to know the value is massively important. But what I would also say is because estate agency is currently unregulated, you need to ensure that you do your own due diligence. So if you ring up and speak to an agent and it's a negotiator, for example, in the office, you should be asking them. The question I always ask is, has the vendor found somewhere to move? Now, that's my way of asking, is this a deceased estate? Is it a motivated seller? Does it have structural issues? Because the agent's often going to say, yeah, that they're moving abroad, they found a bigger house on a new build estate. They're going to give you some context to the vendor situation without you being cheeky and asking, is this a deceased estate? Because that can, you know, come across as insensitive, arguably. So what you want to do, though, is once you've asked those questions of the negotiator, when you then view the property, the key should be, if you found this property, for example, on the market or using your property filter search, you ring up, you build the relationship with the negotiator. Now, often a negotiator and an agency can arrange 30 to 50 viewings per day on average. So you really need to stand out when you're building this rapport with the agent, because the truth is, by the time I used to go home when I was a negotiator, I probably couldn't have told you 48 out of the 50 people who I'd spoke to, because it was literally a transaction. They rang up, asked when they could view it. I said 3 o'clock tomorrow. The phone was put down. That was it. Most people didn't ask me how my day was going. You know, is there any other properties that I could view? What's your opinion on this property? So there was no real reason to carry on the conversation. And, you know, for me, if I've put a new property on the market as an agent and we're getting 10, 15 properties, property viewing requests on the first day that property goes on the market, then you want to be one of those 15 that really stands out to the agent. Because if that negotiator puts your offer forward to the owner, often the only thing that differentiates you from a different offer, you could both be cash, you could both be £100,000 offer. But if you've spent 10, 15 minutes speaking to that negotiator and building up an actual relationship, that relationship might be the difference that sways the offer in your favor, because the negotiator or the valuer are the ones who are going to recommend to the seller whether or not to take your offer over the other person's. So build that relationship. I always just say, you know, ask them how their day's been, you know, if it's a nice day, just, you know, compliment how they're stuck in the office and you've managed to get out. You must be sick today being stuck in the office. You know, the market's busy now. You must be making a lot of commission right now. Just, you need something to break the ice. So, but the purpose of that initial call is to build the relationship with the agent so that, you know, they remember you more than anything. But secondly, it's so that they have the owner's ear. And the key for that conversation is to be the first person to view the property. We'll often find properties that have come on the market. So, I mean, a prime example, there's one that's come on the market that we found this morning on my searches. We've rang the agent and they've said the next viewing is until next Tuesday. Now, in my eyes, there's a very, very good chance that that property could be sold by the time Tuesday comes round. So you can either do what everybody else does and wait till Tuesday and go and see it, or you can try to pull on the negotiator's heartstrings, you know, come up with some sort of excuse. You're on holiday next Tuesday, but you're actually in the area any day, any time between now and then. We found properties where, you know, we told them we're going on holiday and we've managed to get in to do a viewing before anybody else. And therefore, we were actually the only person negotiating with the owner. So it's up to you to get your foot through the door and to get it through first, because yes, you can find the properties quickest using property filter. yes, you can build a better rapport with the agent, but if you hang around and wait to go interview the property, then you stand no chance of getting it. And that's why, you know, when you're looking at search criteria, often the most recently reduced or added to the market can be the ones that you should be keeping the best eye on. Because we find a lot of investors who come through our training course, for example, I'll always do an exercise where I say, okay, show me how you would try to find a deal now. And a lot of people actually start with the oldest listed properties as well. And for me, what I find is if an owner's on the market with 3 or 4 agents, or they've been on with 3 or 4 agents, you know, you'll be to check the history of this, then often they haven't listened to any of the 4 agents' advice. So, and I tend to find that there's often a problem or a reason why they haven't sold. So, you know, you'll often see listings that have been on the market since 2022, 2023. 9 times out of 10 in my area, those properties have been bought in the peak of the market, 2007, and they're in negative equity. So to me, that cries, you know, a rent-to-rent deal or a purchase lease option. That vendor's stuck there and needs a solution to their problem. And the estate agent have rang them every single month and said, hello, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so. You've had no more viewings this month. Your price has dropped again. We've had some new photographs on. We've jazzed the description up. But often the estate agent's advice has been the same across all 4 agents, and it only ever has been reduce your price. So you're coming at it with a complete different angle. So what you tend to find is those deals aren't ones that you can purchase in a traditional sense, but they are ones that you can do deals with. So another tip I would say is when you're dealing with agents, particularly if you're wanting to do more creative deals, then what you should be saying to them is, what do you have currently on your stock list that you don't think you'll ever earn a fee from? So throughout my agency, we've often got a property for sale that has a bad tenant in, for example, where the tenant just isn't playing ball, letting us in for viewings. We might have a property that has a really, you know, expensive lease extension cost. We might have something that's a cash purchase that's structurally damaged. Often it's a property with a problem or a vendor with a problem. So, you know, we've negotiated creative deals with owners where we've agreed a purchase price. We've took over the property within 2 to 3 weeks, so saving the conveyancing process. And because of our knowledge as estate agents, you know, we've negotiated the exit of the tenant, because it might have just been that the tenant in that particular property was the bottleneck that was stopping a deal from being done. So we've went to tenants and offered them 3 or 6 months rent up front to leave the property if they're not playing ball. And often if a property's up for sale, they probably know that eventually they're going to get moved out. So you need to try to find things that are problems, not just for vendors, but things that are problems for agents. Now, the sort of deals that we've negotiated there, we've just paid the estate agent's fee up front. Once we've had a heads of terms agreed with the owner, we literally pay the agent that fee. So the agent's getting paid within 4 weeks of my initial call with them, instead of the average, which is 5 to 6 months for a transaction to go through. So agents will actually appreciate that you're coming to them with solutions for properties that would probably just sit on the market for another 12, 18, 24 months. And it would only be the market actually increasing during that time, which actually leads to a subsequent sale. So speak to agents, ask them what the problem listings are on the property, and work out whether you can use your skills and experience or contacts to fix those problems. So, I mean, another example of one, we had a 1-bedroom flat. The husband and wife were living in the same bedroom as 3 of their children, and they were in negative equity. So they were quite happy just to literally hand that property over to anybody and walk away from it, and just go off and rent something where their kids had their own rooms. But nobody had said to them, well, look, we'll pay the rent and the bond on the new house up front for you if you do a lease option on this one with us. So often trying to work through what the problems are will often come up with a solution. And like you said, that's where there's real value. James heard me discuss how I bought 10 properties through the pin talks that I do. And when I went to auction and bid on these properties, we actually bought 10 flats for a ridiculous amount. I mean, the purchase price was something like £400,000. We spent £100,000 on the renovations, and they were subsequently sold for 800,000. Now, that wasn't just a refurbishment project. I was a social worker. I was a legal professional. I wore all hats when it came to that deal. We had one of the tenants at a cannabis farm in the property. We had 2 tenants die in the properties. But this landlord basically he was your prime reason why property licensing is coming in across rental properties now. Because instead of fixing the cause of a problem, which was damp in a kitchen on one of the properties, he just decided to keep plasterboarding it, felting it. Then when the damp reappeared, he would then just felt and board it again. So he was never fixing the existing problem, which meant the longer he owned the property, the worse the quality of the tenants were getting that he actually had. And we went in there, spent that money, basically managed the exit of 8 out of the 10 tenants. Only 2 of them actually remain. We managed to uplift the rental prices on every single one. I think they were all let for something like £350 to £400 per flat. They're now letting for around about £550, £600 per flat. The guy from the corner shop about 150 meters along absolutely loved us because we found a property that we managed to, replace all of the bad tenants with good tenants. So, it was finding that deal and building a relationship with the agent. And by building a relationship with the agent, I actually managed to negotiate that if I was the successful purchaser at auction, they would actually allow me to have over £40,000 worth of existing rental arrears to be transferred to me. Now, I've actually only probably received about £4 out of the 40,000, but it allowed me to start the possession proceedings against the tenants so much earlier. So again, these properties had probably in excess of 100 viewings going to auction, and nobody asked the agent if they could have the arrears. But to me, it was clear as day. The problem with these properties was the tenants that were in there and the quality of the property. So if we fix the quality of the property and fix the quality of the tenant, that changed these from being an absolutely awful investment to being an absolutely fantastic one. But again, it was because I had found that property, like I say, using Property Filter, we identified that the figures were correct on it. We then used a relationship with the agent and negotiate that the rental arrears to be included. And again, the last owner knew he wasn't going to get them. So it was those kind of 2 things that allowed us to get through the door as early as possible and to be one of the first viewings. But then it was the relationship with the owner that allowed us to actually negotiate, because like everything, when you buy a property, you always have a contingency for refurbishment. You always have a bit of a contingency in there for any extra legal fees, for example. But often people don't put in contingencies for the time side of things. And it was the basically managing these over a 12-month period, the exit of the tenants. That's what led to this being the deal, not the £100,000 that was spent on the refurbishment. So building those relationships with the owner, you'd be surprised when you build those relationships, what you can get. I mean, we've managed to negotiate deals with clients where you've got to go in the property and ask the vendor the right questions. We've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Use them in that order. Ask the vendor a leading question. Have you found somewhere to live? Then listen to what they answer and try and work out whether time or money is more important to that particular vendor. Because we've had deals accepted maybe 10% below someone else's offer because we've been, for example, prepared to wait 6 months to complete on this particular deal. And the example that I used there was that we had an offer accepted at 200,000 on a property where she had an offer at 220. But what she didn't want was the upheaval of moving out of her existing property while her new build property was built. She had a young girl and she was going to have to rent a property, put all her stuff in storage, and she'd end up having 2 moves as opposed to 1 move by taking our offer. And that was because the other buyer wanted to complete within 12 weeks. But because we were prepared to wait double that, she accepted our offer, which was £20,000 less. So again, a lot of people think vendors' motivations are always determined by money, but it's not always the case. Sometimes it's their situation. Sometimes it's the timescales that are involved with their ongoing purchase. Some things are time sensitive. You can often have early repayment charges on mortgages as well. So if you agree completion dates after the early repayment, then, you know, that might save the vendor £2,000 or £3,000, and that might be the difference that sways an offer in your way. But one of the things that we've found as well, and Mark Shaw's a great advocate for this who's been on, so if you haven't listened to Mark Shaw's Deal Corner, you need to listen to that, is he makes multiple offers to clients as well. And it's something we've brought over into our business because, I mean, sometimes people say, we'll give you your price, but on our timescale, or your price and our timescale. It can be a balance of them all. And sometimes by leading with a number of offers, you can actually find out what the vendors, you can dig a little deeper as to what the vendors' motivations are, because you would be surprised how many take lower offers than sort of what they accept. Another sort of tip where I would say is a fantastic one when it comes to agents is to use Deal Filter for is the unsold auction lots. One of the big things with auctions, so if I talk you through a typical example of auction, so, you know, in my region, most auctions are the last week of the month. So what will happen is the property could be going to auction tonight. The property's been on the market for 28 days. There's been a number of block viewings. There's been offers made pre-auction. And what that leads to is it leads to a conversation the day of the auction, which is, hello, Mr. and Mrs. Vendor, this is how many viewings you've had. This is what we've had indications of offers so far. You set your initial reserve at 120, but your best offer is 115. Would you like to reduce your reserve price so that in the auction you guarantee a sale? But the hope is in the auction room, the bidding exceeds that and it sells for more. So that part's up to the owner. Did they drop their reserve price from 120 to 115 and know that they sell tonight? Or do they risk it and leave it to go into the auction room and sell tonight? Now, every single vendor thinks the house is going to sell at auction. My house is better than every other one in there. You know the score. It's always the same. It's not till the fall of the gavel or the hammer or the ending of the online bidding when they get a call from us as the auctioneers to say, the property didn't sell and you had no bids in the room. None of your clients actually turned up to bid. Or your bids didn't meet the reserve. The best offer was 113. So often at that time, the vendor has a decision. Do they take the offer that's on the table, which is the 113 or the 115? Or do they reduce their reserve price from 120 to 115, which allows the agent to reduce the guide price or the starting bids and then re-enter it to the auction at the end of next month? So when you're a valuer and an estate agent, you often discuss with the seller that you're going to have 2 auction cycles. So if it doesn't sell in the first auction, you will go into a second auction and you'll be required to reduce your price in order to secure an entry into that auction. So what you find is a lot of vendors who go to auction are motivated sellers. They're not always births, deaths, marriages and divorces or structurally issued. They're often just people who want a bit of security around timescale. So what you can find is if you make an offer tomorrow, the night after the auction, owners are a lot more susceptible to taking an offer than what there will be over the course of the month, because they thought the house was going to sell last night at auction. I'm ringing them to basically, you know, tear their world apart to say the house didn't sell and, you know, their future plans of buying onward or moving abroad may not happen now. So it's at that point where you'd be very surprised. Like, we can speak to vendors and say, will you drop the reserve from 120 to 115? Now, you know, it's not a massive reduction. And the hope's always to get them more than the 115. But a lot of people will say no in that instance. But they might go on to accept an offer of 110, 112 after the auction. So it really does change the vendor's expectations once the property doesn't sell in auction. So if you can use Property Filter to identify the recently reduced, if you target the ones that have a guide price or a starting bid, don't hang around and wait till next month's auction to bid on them. Get your offer in now, because you'll often find when you get to auction night, I mean, I don't know the average sort of figures on this, but I mean, if I was to guess, I'd probably say 30 to 40% of lots sell pre-auction. So that's only leaving you with 10-15% of the lots that don't actually sell on the night, it's only leaving you with another 35-40% of the actual auction lots to look at. And they might not all be of interest to you. So using things like Property Filter for unsold lots will help us as auctioneers and agents as well. Put your offers in on the properties. Don't wait till the auction night to show your hand, because we'll often use your offers to help drive the vendor's reserve price down. But for us as an auctioneer or an agent, our job is to get the vendor the best possible price. And if we don't do that, then we can be negligent. But we also need to have data, as in a number of viewings and offers, to present to the owner so that the picture tells itself. If you've had no viewings in a month, then you can guarantee that, you know, the property's not going to sell at auction unless there's a blind bidder, which doesn't really happen nowadays or as much. So if you've had 15 viewings and 14 offers, then you can probably guarantee that that property's going to sell. I'm just having a quick look because I think there's a question came in there as well. Yeah, you're right, Richard. It does normally have a buyer's premium paid. But again, one of the things with the buyer's premium method, for example, is a lot of people think that the auction terms are set in stone. We often so there tends to be two options to an auction, option A and option B. Option A tends to be exchange on the night in either a 14 or a 20-day completion. And the second option tends to be a 28-day exchange with a further 28 days to complete. But what you can do as well is, if it's a buyer's premium is often separate to the purchase price. So if you've only got a 10% of the 200,000 plus the 6, like, you can flip the offer around and offer 206,000 to include the £6,000 buyer's premium. So the buyer's premium, how you pay it, it can be a premium or a deposit, and a deposit's part of the purchase price. But you can also change the timescales from 28 days to 56. Now, it has to be with the vendor's agreement. But again, that's why if you build the right relationship with the agent, they have the owner's ear. And if an extra 28 days doesn't make a difference to the vendor's circumstances and the offer's correct, then that can be negotiated. So feel free to ask the question. You won't always get the right answer, but sometimes you do. Sometimes you don't. Was there anything else you wanted us to touch on, Guillaume, while I'm on as well?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. So you touched on the different people in the office. I know the valuer are more vendor facing, the negotiator are the ones who are going to do the grunt work really, and you want to stand out so that they remember you because they see lots of people. You talked about you know, the clever question to ask, you know, has the vendor found anywhere, you know, somewhere to move, and then building rapport with the negotiator. Find problems to solve for the vendor, the agents, understanding the time scale and the motivation, and then we move into the auction. So that was quite interesting. Wes was mentioning that he's heard about being able to negotiate 90-day payments on auction completions with auction house. Don't know if you've seen this as well.
I mean, it all depends on the auction houses. So your big auction houses like your Allsops and things, you probably find there's not a great deal of flexibility with those auction houses. Their terms are their terms, and their auctions are full day auctions over a series of days. With your sort of more regional sort of auction providers, that's when there's a bit more flexibility, because it's, you know, they might have 100 to 200 lots in the auction each month versus an Allsops that might have 1,000 lots in. So it's just down to the time scales that the staff have as well. I mean, we used to make a point of, after every single auction, ringing every single vendor. So there'd be a team of us doing that on the unsold lots. And again, the hope was always that you had offers to present to the client, because, you know, they had a problem in that they wanted to sell a property. Our job's to find them a solution, whichever that offer is. And like you say, there's so many terms that can be negotiated with the auction houses. I mean, yesterday, for example, we negotiated a pair of flats that are currently tenanted. They're not the greatest of tenants. I mean, from our side, we want to do a cosmetic refurb, and then we want to re-tenant them at a higher price. Most people, those adverts online state that they're being sold tenanted. We've negotiated vacant possession on those, and we've doubled the length of time for completion because they weren't due to go to auction till the 24th of July. I'll have exchanged contracts probably by then. So I'll still fall within the if he had a left it to auction next month, but he's also going to remove the tenants for. So some of the things can be pre-negotiated, but I suppose it's that thing, if you don't ask, you don't get. But what I will
Yeah.
say as well is it also depends on who you ask. You can talk to the same auctioneer and you'll get a different answer from different staff. So try to find, if it is an agent, try to find who the specific auction contact is, because often they'll have more flexibilities around the timescales than a negotiator or a valuer in the office will, because their job is to manage, for example, that you've got a full room of bidders if it's a physical auction, which a lot more are online now, so it's less dependent on you filling seats and having a room full of people.
Just to drill down a little bit on that, Tony, you mentioned about the value-added negotiator in the traditional estate agency. How are auction houses organized, and who does what, and who do you want to speak to, and what do you
Yeah.
get from, what value do you share with different people, and what do you get from
Yeah,
different people?
so I mean, if I give an example, sort of in my region in the northeast, so you've got I Am Sold Auctions, which is intelligent auction management. They're probably one a lot of you guys will be familiar with. They're also the buyer's premium auction. So the way that the model sort of works with them is each estate agent sort of find their own properties or listings or auction entries. So we're responsible for, going out, valuing the property, signing the owner up, taking the photos, doing the viewings. But then any follow-up of the viewing feedback will come from the auction department, which they're kind of like just one big, call center, for example. But they'll also manage the full auction process. So they'll manage the legal pack. They'll do all of the vendor contact. They'll put all the offers forward. So us as agents will have to upload your details as the buyer to a platform, and then it's the auctioneer who then carry it on from there. There's other auction houses. So for example, Pattinson's in the northeast have about 25, 30 branches. So that's the auction that I used to run back in the day. So they'll be interlinked. So instead of having, 400 branches passing properties to one central auctioneer, they've got 28 branches feeding the properties into the auction. So they're a big enough agent that they can have their own auction. Where, my agency's, it's a one branch agency. There'd be no point us hiring a room to hold an auction because we wouldn't have enough entries, So we'd probably average 3 to 5 auction properties a month. But again, it just all depends. The auction houses are all different. I mean, a great piece of I think you guys are looking into some stuff here is EIG has some fantastic information relating to the auctions as well. If people are looking for the data, they'll tell you which auction houses are on which date as well. But what I've found as well is a lot of the auction houses are moving away from your traditional, once a month auction. Now every property's going online just with a 28-day countdown, more or less. So, but again, they're only dependent on selling, providing the legal pack comes in times, which we all know how slow solicitors can be.
And do you find you're doing more auction deals at the moment? And there's two sides of the question. Is one, are you getting more business referring properties to be sold at auction? And the other one is, are you buying your own deals or sourcing more of your own deals at the moment? What's the seasonality of the auction industry, let's say, in your region?
I think so property is very seasonal to begin with. I mean, the biggest sort of driver of sort of property is, family homes, people moving in the summer holidays and things for kids to be sort of settled by the time the kids go back to school. Then, they go back to school, then you've got the Christmas period, and then you've got Easter. So property seasonally to begin with. That's why you'll often, for example, we often know that over the winter months, we're probably going to have a few bungalows to, sell via auction because they'll have come from, unfortunately, elderly people dying or going into care, for example. So we know that there's probably an oversupply of bungalows in the new year. By the time you get around to summer, you're back to sort of sensible numbers on that. Particularly with the mortgage rates and things now, you're finding a lot more people going to auction who maybe wouldn't have considered it in the past because their mortgage is maybe going from £1,000 a month up to £1,500 a month. So they maybe don't have that buffer within their own spending. And you've always got, you've always got a steady stream of auction properties, you know, every single month. I mean, you know, a lot of auctions don't have one in December, for example. But it's just seasonally. I mean, I'm saying if I go sort of larger and if I talk a bit more historic, we've had, for example, you know, a lot of pubs used to go through auction after the smoking ban. They were being picked up by the likes of Tesco's and Asda for little supermarkets. Now we're seeing a lot more care homes and things going in. I'm seeing quite a lot of land sites going through there as well because build costs are so expensive. So I suppose it depends on the sort of property type, really. But like I say, there's definitely some sort of seasonality to it.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything notable right now. You see, like you're doing more deals than like this time last year or anything like that.
Yeah, I think we probably are. I'm not going to say it's all your fault with Property Filter that we're doing more, but it may be contributing towards that. But I think maybe 12 months ago as well, because the market was probably still quite hot. I think a lot of people's fixed mortgages have come to an end over the last 12 months. So I think the level of stock that agents have has increased over the last 12 months, or I've certainly seen it. Again, I think it all depends on sort of areas. Again, it's some areas we're finding are maybe slightly oversupplied at the minute. I think while people watch interest rates come down, see what happens with the general election and things. Other areas, things are absolutely booming and still selling for over asking price. So I suppose it just depends, really.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah,
I definitely think I think vendors are a bit more susceptible to offers and more creative things this year than last year, maybe. Because I think reality's maybe hit home a little bit that, you know, the cost of living crisis, I think people are actually seeing how much money they've got in their pocket now. And I think everybody's looking at their monthly expenses. So I think you're probably seeing vendors being a little bit more realistic than maybe following on from COVID where, you know, everything's sold over asking price.
Yeah. I guess I'm asking because I know you've got quite a few, you and your team, there's quite a few foot on the ground, you know, and you see quite a few things going on. So just wondering, so what's happening in terms of how many deals you see going through to you, and so you're saying the market is more, you can put forward more creative strategies at the moment than you would have this time last year or last summer.
I think one of the things I would say there is if a property's just recently came on the market, there's still really, really high levels of interest. I mean, the number of viewings and offers is ridiculous on some lots, on some properties that come on the market. So, you know, we've been to best and finals on 3 or 4 properties this week, which shows that there is still some high levels of demand on the buyers. So I think on new listings, you've got less chance of something creative, like your lease options and things. But if a property's been on the market for a period of time, they're the ones where I'd probably be trying the creative things. One of the things I have noticed is you've got a lot of properties where sales have fell through more than once.
Yeah.
And I think that's down to lenders changing their criteria. You know, the rates when they finally do their application are different to when they first got their mortgage in principle, maybe 5, 6 months ago, particularly for things like first-time buyers and things. So I think things like that, where, you know, you've spent 3 or 4 months of having a sale go through, that sale falls through, and then you think you start the process again and that happens again. Those are the sort of people where, you know, we're managing to do some quite creative stuff, providing they've got some equity in the property. But then you've got things like the leasehold reform and things as well. So some of the shorter lease stuff, I think even the owners on some of those are getting a little bit more clued up that things might change for them. So I suppose it just depends, really. But it's there's definitely deals to be done out there, but I think you have to be quite quick, particularly on the new listings, I think.
Do you want to comment on the lease reform bill and what's been happening and what you've been doing
Yes,
around
so
that?
I mean, there's a lot of housing estates across the UK where properties now have leases that are below 75 years, which is the point which they become unmortgageable. So if I give you a sort of typical example of a short lease in one of the areas nearby me, you can pick up a nice, and I mean, it's a really nice flat for about 45, 50k. But the cost to extend that lease can be between 50 and 20k. And the value of them with a long lease is around 80k. So, you know, if you're picking them up at 40 and spending 15 on them, there's a refinance element of those deals. But often the owners of the freehold, they're quite I'm trying to be polite when I say this. They're not the nicest of companies to deal with. So if I give an example, one of the clients has just had a quote back for £22,500 to extend his lease. And there's kind of no methodology as to how they arrive at that figure. There is, but I don't see how they apply it. So the government are trying to introduce a set of regulations so that there's a fair way to do this. Because considering that guy bought that property and short leases wasn't a thing when he bought it 20 years ago, now he's below 75 years, he can only sell that property to a cash buyer, or he has to pay to extend the lease himself. And I've also noted that on quite a lot of new builds, maybe around 2007 to 2010, there's a lot of people who've built properties, and this is some of the big house builders as well, where the ground rent doubles every so often. And it's actually led to a number of, I mean, I've got one in one of the blocks myself. The flat's 8, 9 years old, and it's now unmortgageable because of the ground rent term that's in the lease. So you need the freeholders to amend that. So the government, they tried to pass it before Parliament closed, but the devil wasn't in the detail. They're looking to make a fair system for ground rents as well as lease extensions. So you should be to go on a .gov website in the future and ping your details in as to how short your lease is, when you bought it, what the value is, and it should come out as a sort of a fair transaction price. Because I don't think vendors would mind if it was 5, 6, 7, 8, 9K. But when it's 22, 23,000 pound, like they didn't even put that much down as deposits on a lot of these properties. So a lot of people they can be classed as mortgage prisoners, and they're actually stuck in the property that they're in because they can't sell it and clear the mortgages that they've got on the property. So the government are trying to change that. So there's definitely some opportunities around short lease properties if you can get purchase lease options on them. Because when the reform comes in, the cost of the lease extension should drop significantly.
And we see a lot of our members do this. They go and secure lease options on these speculatively, knowing that you get the control for the next couple of years or 5 years.
Yeah,
and there might be something there, and we get the rent in the meantime, so it's very low risk. Would you, in terms of the sourcing side of the business, so would you tend to sell, to sell deals to, and what are they looking for? What are the sort of criteria, and what's the sentiment?
I think one of the things that I love about it is how you can do different strategies. So if I give you an example, sort of how our methodologies changed and my processes have changed. When I built my own portfolio, which I mentioned, I bought 34 properties in 36 months. I used a lot of buy, refurb, refinance at the time, and I raised private finance. Now, as the market, improved with COVID and things, and houses were selling over asking price, there was no longer buy, refurb, refinance properties around, or certainly not to the volume that I was finding them in the previous 12 months. So as property investors, you need to learn to adapt, and finding who the motivated sellers are is part of that process, I think. So what we done coming out of COVID, particularly when we had our first vaccines, was we started buying up holiday homes in volume. We bought about 50, 60 holiday homes, but we bought those. I think someone's got a speaker.
Oh, sorry, got rid of that. Yep.
So what we done was we bought about 50 holiday homes, and we bought them on 2-year fixed mortgages. Now, the reason we bought those and targeted those was because those particular sellers had lost their income stream. They were no longer able to rent their properties out as holiday homes. So these guys all of a sudden have got this mortgage to cover. So they were selling holiday homes off for prices that we thought were brilliant. But what we knew was, with conveyancing currently taking 6 months at the time, we knew by the time we completed on those properties that people weren't going to be going abroad. They were going to be remaining in the UK. So we bought those holiday homes, and we actually achieved some fantastic nightly rates. I don't know if you remember, but as certain areas of the country were opening, everyone was flocking to those areas. And because, density-wise, we're not the densest of places, the North East. We've got the Northumberland coast, the Lake District, things like that. We were one of the regions that were opening. So, you know, the nightly rates we were getting were absolutely astronomical. But we also knew there was, so that was kind of the oversupplied the market were holiday homes because they couldn't rent them out. And the demand level dropped as well. But we knew if we were sensible with our purchase price, the demand to stay in those properties was going to pick up, because we knew that staycations versus going abroad was going to be the option for most people. And it's only really from this summer, I think, that people have really started going back abroad. So we were quite fortunate that we sold most of those last summer. So we kind of feel like we bought low and sold high, which is, you know, a fundamental property investment sort of strategy, isn't it? Buy low, sell high. So then what we done from then is we tried to identify, okay, well, what are the next motivated sellers? And what we found there was that HMO sellers were quite motivated, because you've seen so much purpose-built student accommodation in big cities, particularly in the likes of Newcastle. You know, HMOs in student areas, no longer were the students staying in halls for year one and then sharing with their friends in years 2, 3, and 4. A lot of them are staying in this purpose-built accommodation because they've got shared gyms, shared communal living areas, cinemas, and they're closer to campus. So we knew that a lot of those student HMOs were going to be repurposed as professional HMOs. So we started buying a number of those. And again, with the way utilities went, with inflation, the profit margins were really being eroded for HMO landlords. So a lot of them just sold them up and decided to, you know, put their money in the bank or whatever. But we also then combined HMOs with social housing projects as well, because we knew with HMOs, if a room was empty and the utility bills kept going up, we knew the profit margins were going to get et. But we knew by combining HMOs with a social housing provider, the social housing provider guaranteed the rent for 5 years. So we knew we weren't going to have any voids, but they also cover the utility costs. So we get all the benefits of HMO without having the 5 or 6 tenants reporting one maintenance issue, because we're managing a housing provider instead of 6 individual tenants. So I suppose what I would say is using property filters has allowed us to jump between strategies that little bit easier, because we kind of always had one strategy that worked, and then, you know, we pivoted as the market pivoted, whereas now we're kind of running them sort of simultaneously. So we're buying serviced accommodation units in Newcastle city centre. The international clients are really invested in those with what's going on with the football club. On the social housing HMOs, we're buying terraced houses for 80 to 100k, and we're getting 15 to 20% ROI on those. I think buy-to-let's still great now. I see a lot of people saying not to buy buy-to-let because of the interest rates and that the cash flow's dried up. But in my opinion, if you're buying a buy-to-let now, or certainly a good one, yes, the cash flow might not be fantastic, but you've probably just negotiated 10, 15, 20,000 pound discount from what that house will be when the interest rates start to drop. So there's like a bit of an immediate equity gain on some of the buy-to-let you're buying now as well. And particularly in the areas where there's regeneration going on, because the house prices are flying up in some of those areas.
Awesome, yeah, that's really interesting. A couple of questions in the chat here. Connie and Katie were asking around the guide price, that they were advised by the auctioneer they couldn't put offers outside the 10% range of the guide price pre-auction. So
I'll touch on that. So Katie, Property Talk on the Timey podcast, has got a really good episode on auction guide prices and reserves. So if I talk you through the main auctions in my area, so Pattinson's auction, and I'll use an example of a property with £100,000 reserve price. The guide price with Pattinson's would probably be £80,000, which to me, I feel like if that was £1 million house and the guide was 800,000, that would be very misleading in my opinion. It would be quite far off what the expectations are price-wise. So I think that potentially borders along potential Property Misdescriptions Act. So they try to keep it a little bit less than 20%, but I often find an auctioneer like Pattinson's will often use that. So their hope is the buyer will offer 90 and the vendor will come down from 100, and they'll sort of meet somewhere in the middle. That's their pricing strategy on that. Now, the auctioneer that I use, that same example, we would probably be using a reserve of 90. So instead of aiming for the best case sale price, we're aiming for the worst case scenario. and we'd have a guide price of 85,000 on that property. So we'd be looking to hit reserve on our properties very quick and early in the auction process. So that's not necessarily true with the 10%. I mean, an agent does have to legally put any offer that you put forward in writing according to the Estate Agents Act. Now, they can refuse offers if the owner's told them not to put any offers forward below the 10%, then they also don't need to do that. But what I would be saying is always put your offer forward and writing on every single property, every single time. I mean, some auction houses are better than others for dealing with clients and tying things up pre-auction. The likes of Allsops will only sell in an auction room. You're wasting your time even trying. But as you start to speak to these, you'll start to get a better idea as to who you can work with and who you can't. So smaller independents are probably better to get stuff negotiated. Your big corporate auctions are very, very by the book. They won't do anything. So, but again, guides typically probably anywhere from up to 20% difference between the guide and the reserve price, but often within 10%, I would say would probably be the more general rule.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know you could deviate from the 10%, yeah, I didn't realize that, and I was pretty sure you could put any offer you wanted. Anyway, I mean, because they should push forward your offer, you know. So that's a bit, the comment what that was made to you, Katie, seems a bit weird. Like, you know, they are supposed to put your offer forward anyway. So that's probably the thing. Jenny was asking, how are your investors feeling about the current market? Are they happy, excited? Are they worried? What's the sentiment on people you shift deals to?
Do you know what it is? I think there's a real difference. I mean, you know, I suppose it all depends where you get your data from. If you're reading the newspapers, which, by the way, the newspapers is the second biggest seller in newspapers is property prices. The first's weather. So when you're reading the newspapers, you've got to be conscious that they've got a motivation is to sell that newspaper. So you'll always find it's boom or bust. It's never in between. But it's the same with the weather. It's always the hottest summer on record or the coldest winter on record. Yet I look out the window and it's just a normal day. It's no different than normal. So
yeah, by the way, I wanted to ask you, is that the view from your back window in Newcastle, is it?
I wish. No, this is the green screen. I think I'm somewhere in the south of France by the looks of it.
Yeah, well, I wish to, yeah.
But what I thought you've lost us my trail of thought now, Guillaume.
Sorry.
What was I saying there?
Weather, newspapers.
Oh, the investors, yeah. So I suppose it depends on your data. So for me, I get most of my data. I like to look firstly at anything I've listed for sale and rent in the auction, in the agency, because I can see a property we put on yesterday. How many people have actually rang up about it today? I can see supply and demand live, and I can see what's going on with that. Whereas I then look for like a bit of a lag in the data. So I look at, for example, Rightmove's data. They'll release the house price index monthly. So for example, last month, the Northeast was the top performing region with house prices going at 1%. Again, I'll kind of read into that and interpret that data in my own way. But that'll tell you things like the average stock that an agency has. It'll tell you the average time for property sales. So really good quality data, I think, and quite on the button. Whereas if you wait for things like the land registry data, that's well out of date by the time, you know, we're able to analyze it. You don't really have your finger on the pulse a little bit. So I suppose what I would say is how many investors are finding things probably depends on how informed they are. I mean, for me, I'm of the opinion that interest rates will drop this year. I try to explain it to my clients that the north versus the south is completely different. If you're dealing with average property prices of 650,000, a change in the interest rate's really going to impact your market. If you're talking £100,000 house, we probably don't feel an interest rate change anywhere near as much as you guys do down south. So that'll also indicate what the market's like as well. So some of our sourcing clients say, well, you know, why would we pay you a fee to buy a property over asking price? I say, well, you know, you're buying a property in probably one of the fastest rising postcodes in the country. And without us being on the ground and seeing that property the first day it goes on the market or before it goes on the market, you'd probably stand no chance of ever buying that property because it would go to best and finals and sell. So it depends. I mean, we've got some clients who, I talk to on an annual basis, and we laugh about it a little bit in the office. They didn't buy because of Brexit a few years ago, and then they didn't buy because of COVID, and then they didn't buy because of Ukraine and Russia, and now they're not buying because of interest rates yet. Had they bought back when we first started speaking to them, they would have been in a much better position than what they are. So I suppose it all depends on what stages people are at. I mean, you've got a lot of established landlords who, have maybe benefited from a lot of capital or equity growth in the last 20, 30 years, who maybe just want out, who feel like, now's a good time to sell with, legislation, the amount of legislation and licensing coming in and things, and Article 4s. You've got other people who are saying this is a great opportunity to get in, and then you've got everybody in the middle. But so I suppose it's open to interpretation, but I think the people who have their fingers on the pulse and who are looking at the correct data and looking at, is demand or supply going to go up or down in the next 12 months? Are they building enough new houses? Are there enough buyers in the market? Then I suppose that there's always people looking, and there's always people who are hesitant, who are trying to buy the dip,
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Anthony. I really appreciate that. Do you have any contact details, or people can join you, find you, get in touch with you
Yeah, do you want us just to share those in the comment box for everybody?
Yeah, if you want, yeah, or you can, share your screen or drop things in the comments. Yeah, absolutely. That's
What I'll do is I'll post a link firstly for Katie to the podcast as well, to that link that I mentioned for her.
Perfect, yeah.
I think it's only about 10 minutes as well. Mind, I do swear in the podcast as well, just to forewarn you. And what I'll do is I'll pop my contact details on there as well. If anybody would like a sort of a free, strategy call, whether you're trying to grow your portfolio or sell it, because Games Invited is on here, I don't mind posting a link on there as well. It's 30 minutes where I can look at your situation, give you some advice on how you grow your portfolio, how you reduce it in size, or anything that you want advice on. Really, it doesn't have to be that you're interested in buying in my area, anything like that. I just give it as a bit of a freebie to Games clients.
Thanks so much. Did you put it, or I can see the podcast? Yeah.
So I put the link to the podcast. I'm going to put my email address on there. That's if I can spell it correctly. And then what I would say is, if anybody wants to reach out, just put the subject line in the email just to say property filter, and the girls will know where that kind of came from. And I'll put a link just to my own website as well, which has got a contact form on there as well.
Perfect.
And if there's nothing, I mean, has anybody else got any more questions at all? I've got another 5-10 minutes.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, we can take some time. I think I went through. There was a question around how many years. What's the shortest lease length you would look at for like a short lease property to acquire control or do a deal with it?
So I suppose there is no shortage. I mean, as it gets to zero, the property would then refer to the freeholder. So what I tend to find is the lower the length of the lease, the higher the premium is to buy it. But another sort of tip with short leases as well is everybody always goes for a 999-year lease. You don't necessarily need that. If you're just trying to make a deal work, look at getting a new 99 or 125-year lease. I mean, I know people down south who are paying £200,000-300,000 for lease extensions, so that gives you an idea as to the value that can be in them.
Yeah.
And they've had them for 125, 150 because they've took shorter leases, which has then allowed them to basically sell that property onto the mortgage market where they bought it cash. So look at any lease length, but when you're coming to do the extension, ask if the freeholder is prepared to do a reduced rate for a shorter length of lease, because they think they're going to get paid again in 25 years' time. And a lot of these freeholds are owned by pension pots and things like that, or wealthy French people.
Yeah, I wish. Yeah, thanks a lot. You mentioned a few times, about you talked about, like the stuff you do, looking at like finding auctions, finding deals through auctions, finding deals with working with agents and things like. Could you describe a little bit your operation? Like are you organizing, like you've got different departments, or is it different channels and people you've got someone looking at the auctions, or is it just you like looking and sniffing a good deal every,
so what we've got within our offices, we've tried to play to our strengths a little bit. So I wouldn't dream of showing you my office because my admin skills are absolutely shocking. But I'm fantastic at looking at a deal and finding a creative element to it. So what we do within the office, there's a breakdown in staff. So we've got some clients, some staff are more client focused, office based. You know, they do the, you know, the sales strategy calls with a lot of clients. They'll do the investment reviews annually. They'll use Property Filter to keep an eye on deals coming through. But then in terms of the property side, there's myself and Rachel. So I've trained as a chartered surveyor, valued in agencies for probably the last 20 years, covered the whole of the Northeast within that. There's myself and Rachel, who's actually an associate RICS member. So when we're sourcing for clients, one of the biggest things with a sourcing agent is your reputation. If your figures don't stack up at what you've sold a deal at, then, you know, the deal's not a deal maybe. So, you know, from our side, having a surveyor's eyes on that, I mean, it's not necessarily a lending valuation that we've done, but it's the same methodology that we've used it. So no emails would get emailed out our database or put to any of our clients until the figures had been checked by Rachel. It's just a fail-safe for us, really. If we're going to charge an introductory fee for finding a property for someone, then we need to have done the right level of due diligence from our side, particularly if it's in an auction, for example, because the client might be putting a 10% deposit down and exchanging contracts immediately. So they need to have faith in our numbers, and they need to have assurances that, you know, it is what we've said it is, basically.
Yeah.
So we've got the couple of sources are on the property side. Sorry, on the client side, we're on the property. There's crossovers between both as well. I mean, there's not a lot of crossovers between our estate agency and we're sourcing business, to be fair. Other than any properties we source, we pass to our agency to rent out, because we've got a conflict of interest there. So if any valuations come in via the estate agency, they wouldn't be put to the sourcing team, because we've got a duty of care to the client to get them the best possible price. Whereas on the sourcing side, my job's to try to buy for as cheap as possible. So yeah, they kind of work alongside each other, but we've got to have specific separate elements to it. Because we're members of the Ombudsman and things like that, we've got to be transparent with our dealings.
Okay. Yeah, thanks so much, Tony. Do you have any sort of closing sentiment to leave us hanging with or inspired with?
Not really. I'll tell you what you can do. I'm actually out speaking 3 or 4 times next month as well. So what I'd love is I'll post a link to my social media as well. Please follow us.
Yeah.
You'll see where I am. I mean, it's normally Guillermo, one of his lot, following us round at the minute. I think I seem to be the warm-up act for his show. But I'm going to be all over the country as well. So if anybody wants to meet in person and hear my actual story, which is the real highs and lows of my journey, there's been some really big highs and some really bad lows as well, then come see us somewhere. I mean, if you reach out to us as well, I can give you a code for you to have a free ticket. And like I say, if anybody wants out, then property's all about networking. So reach out, follow us. If I can help, I will. If I can't, then I'll no doubt connect you with someone who can.
Tony, much appreciated your time today. Thanks so much for joining us. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today and sticking with us until the end. Yeah, do visit Tony's social. Do take him on his offer to connect, send him an email. I mean, if you want to speak with him and the team, like, it's very generous of him. So I know, we all want more help in our businesses sometimes, and here's someone with quite a bit of experience who is offering his time. So do take him on this great gift. So thanks so much. And yeah, in the meantime, visit propertyfilter.co.uk, log on to your Property Filter account, check out the blueprint where you can define your goldmine area, engage with motivated sellers, assess properties in seconds, load your pipeline and make deals, have an endless supply of deals, join the top 1% and become a high achiever deal finder. I hope you enjoyed today's Deal Finder corner like I did, and I very much look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tony. Thank you all.